fabric and stuff. Like, I'm like, why? Oh, what's your favorite thing about sewing? And she's like, because I made it. I just made it myself. It's not even like that. It turned out like the way I wanted it to or anything. I just thought I made it myself. You know.
Yeah. I mean, what we've done is replace skills with resumes. Like, you go to get employment. The skills that are valuable are the ones that get you employed. Any skills that don't add to your resume are silly. Why would you do that? And so that's like education is about resume building. That's why it looks like it's not education.
Right.
Like, schooling is not education. Schooling is about resume building. Like, education would be the ability to discern, make choices, tell stories, cut wood, understand how to read history, how to read a book. Reading a book is not mere literacy. Reading a book is a deeper act. That's for him, like, schooling is about resumes. And you can say all day long, because even people are like, well, we do the humanities tried to say, well, we're not about getting a job. Well, they're closing left and right. English departments are going under. And they are about getting you a college professorship. That's why you do, like, they are about getting you a job, even if they say they're not. And so really, like, so what do you go to school, like, what do you go to school for that isn't resume building? To learn to read? Maybe to do addition? You could learn that outside school quite easily. So what else? What about everything else? What about everything past fourth grade? Can we really honestly say that everything past fourth grade isn't primarily in the business of resume building? It's primarily in the business of resume building, which of course it would be if everything's about the system.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the resume building comes in a little bit later, though. Like,
But why are you going to high school and middle school to go to college? Why are you going to college?
Well, yes. I mean, ultimately,
it's all resume
system.
building.
Yeah, it's all for that, ultimately, sure. I mean, it's not for actually, like, having some skill to go do something in the world with,
No.
Except to say you go to school and having something somewhere where you go.
Well, yeah, that's...
I mean... Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about, like, what you were saying on this idea of, the resume and the sort of, like, it's toward a job. And, this is not, like, there's nothing inherently wrong here. We're not saying there's anything wrong with the job. And the thing is that the system as it is not, like, that's, like, an interesting thing to me. It's, like, you actually can very much accommodate the system, if you will, and things outside of the system. As like almost a backup plan or as a empowerment to feed into the system or vice versa, kind of like a, let those two things be a feedback loop. But there's sort of this strong, it's almost like to talk about the system and critique it almost like, how I said at the very beginning where I was saying how it's hard for people to have anything be brought to attention because then it just they feel criticized.
Yes.
And this is an example because people could hear Illich or hear kind of conversations about problems with the system in the sense of it being autonomous, right? Like an autonomous system, and think it's a criticism of all jobs and all the economy. And it's like, no. It's not that. It's the fact that we have to think about like what actually makes us feel more empowered in our lives, in our own in our own individuality, in our own like choices, and not so mentally destabilized that we have like, that we are like not able to fully function or have like good relationships,
well,
et cetera.
There's a funny way in which one of the ways you keep your mind from going to crazy land is doing something with your hands, right?
Yep.
Like if you just put your hands to something, you can clear your mind.
Oh yeah, sorry, I remember it was.
Oh sure, but the issue is
ahead.
if like no one can put their hands to anything because they don't have any skills and they can't clear their minds.
Absolutely. And I think like maybe people hit the gym or take a run or something.
Well, they hit the gym. That's a big thing that people do. Yeah.
And that's fine.
And
but
exercise.
Like you can't.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, it's great stuff.
Sure.
But it can maybe make you feel like, what am I making or what can I do? Like.
But what you have is this interesting explosion of white collar jobs and like extreme sports, where people do long distance. It's very interesting that those things seem to correlate. What's very popular now is jiu-jitsu is rising in popularity. And of course these things have a place. It will be cute, but it does seem that there are certain limitations to it, especially once, people have kids or they get older. And also eventually, like, people start to then question, like, why am I at the gym? And then that eventually, if that's the only... Because going to the gym is not a skill necessarily. It could be. You have muscles, you have strength, you have cardio, but then
But what
do
is
you,
it for?
What is it for? That's
Yeah,
eventually
yeah.
what hits people. And
Yeah.
by all means, going to the gym is an extraordinarily wonderful thing versus,
very-
say, something else, you know, so,
Right.
but eventually what can happen, what seems to happen, from what I've read, and that doesn't mean it's official, I don't have any hard numbers, but it does seem there's lots of anecdotal evidence that eventually people go, what's this even for?
Yeah.
And then it fails, you know, it
Yeah.
falls.
I mean, it's
But the
great.
very fact that white collar and kind of extreme sports, or this kind of rise of sports, go together does suggest there is some at least subconscious feeling of I'm not using my hands or I'm not using my body.
Yeah.
That would suggest what Illich's all pointing about regarding disablement.
Yeah. And what I remembered was like this idea of chopping wood. I think there's a lot of like fear when it comes to like letting kids actually use an axe.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's like, I get it, terrifying, but at the same time, it's like they have to learn how to use fire and use axes. Like, I one time wrote down like these notes about like fire and how we used to like learn at a younger age how to make fire, use fire, be responsible with it. Obviously, it can be very risky, and that's why you have to be careful with it. But if there's such a fear of even like I think there's a lot of kind of fear around having a kid learn to use an axe, having them learn to use be careful with fire and stuff like this, where it kind of just gets completely it just I don't know, it's like they're
But that's
you have to be able to like it requires something of the adults to say yes, like let's let them use a knife or something like this, you know.
But I think that's exactly right, but I want to say also too that one of the main causers of that is the medical system, the costs. Like this is a huge thing, I think, that's not talked about enough, in the sense of the medical like insurance, and Illich was very critical of the medical system, and for good reasons. Like if your kid cuts his finger in a severe way and you have to go to the emergency room, you have no idea how much it will cost. Like you just don't know. And where there's that lack of knowledge, and it could bankrupt you.
But what if it just hits your deductible? I mean,
But you don't know. That's the problem. You
why do
don't
you
know.
not?
Well, let's say it hits your deductible. Your deductible is what, 4,000? You know, that's still
Sure.
an unbelievable amount. The average
But-
American apparently doesn't have $400. I'm not
Right.
defending it. I'm
Sure,
just
sure.
saying what is the zeitgeist. I'm a strong believer that one of the main things that has led to this helicopter parenting society we have is the medical system, is the medical costs, because you just simply don't know. If your kid breaks their arm,
right.
you know, if I knew, because, I don't know, hospitals have price transparency. If I knew that if my kid broke his arm, it would be $500. Okay. All right, I know that. But the issue is it's unknown. You just don't know. If they break their arm and you take them to the hospital, suddenly it's friggin' 8,000. Like, why? Because that doctor stepped in the office for 5 seconds. You know,
Sure.
and he's going to charge you, and he's going to charge you. So this lack of knowing the cost of injury is one of the most devious forms of disablement today, in my opinion, is the way that you just don't know the costs of injury. And like, likewise, why do people, like, there is no doubt that a big thing that keeps people from, say, traveling is going outside of medical networks. Like, unless you have a white-collar job that then covers it, and you have you have one of those plans that changes things, for most Americans, it is terrifying to travel. Precisely because what if something happens? Well, you're bankrupt. So that's
Is that like a type of like, is that living in fear?
well, this something we talk about in the class, the difference between fear and wisdom. You know, even if it is fear, it's not stupid in one sense. It's tricky. This is why we have to, like, one of the hardest distinctions of all is this distinction between fear and wisdom.
Yeah.
It's a reality. You know, even if you say it could be fair, of course it can be fair, but it's also a reality.
Right.
And that's, like, this is an example, to me, a very clear example of how a disabling system leads to parents being nervous to let their kids on a freaking playground. Like, they've gotten rid of playgrounds everywhere because they're scared to death. And you can't, I think for me, it's too simplistic to boil it down to parents are afraid. The parents become afraid, like it's all the system and the people exist in a feedback loop. I mean, I can tell you myself that just not knowing, like, what things would cost at a hospital impacts, you know, your thinking about the stuff you're going to let your kids do.
Well, what's the I mean, sure, like that gets into like a lot of like stuff on medical
medical nemesis
Yeah.
that he talks about.
But I mean, what's the solution? Learning how to.
Bandage things yourself. No, but it's
You know what I
a
mean?
great
Like,
example.
it's-
But one of the reasons I bring it up is because exactly, what is the solution? Where does that leave us? Do we want to be left here? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Does it mean we need to? Well, I mean, it gets into policy things like price transparency, and I mean, it gets into literal systems things. But I'm not saying that you don't let your kid do things, but it's an example of how disablement works.
Well, it's so. I mean, it is a great example because it shows like the deeply kind of unconscious. I mean, it's always conscious, unconscious feedback loop, you know.
Sure.
But it's like it grips the heart and the mind in a way that is very difficult to shake, even if you want to, you
Yes.
know. And it's hard to feel justified in shaking it because you're like, I still don't know what the cost would potentially be. And like, yes, even if you were to say like, hit a deductible, but there are weird things that happen with insurance where suddenly
they don't cover
this
things.
doctor was just out of your network. It happened to be.
Oh, you've got
and
hospitals
it's weird.
now.
It's very
no,
strange.
this is criminal now, where they've got literally at the same hospital they have doctors.
Certain doctors that work with this.
That's a straight crime. Like that should be illegal, but it's But you don't know. That's the key. You don't know.
It's like there's such a lack of price transparency and the way that the insurance companies are. You know, I understand, like, in a sense, I get, like, there's something, I'm sure they're doing their best in a sense, and they're offering something that helps people not pay tens of thousands of dollars when they,
Are we talking the nurses and doctors or the bureaucracy? Because I have very little, charity toward the bureaucracy.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like...
I mean, they don't even. One of the reasons
people actually looked into what the costs are for things, because a lot of people
don't get
know.
bills. You need to get everyone get an itemized bill.
If you get an itemized bill,
it will blow your mind.
It will blow your mind how much stuff costs. Like,
and how arbitrary it is, and they're tricking you. You need to get an itemized bill.
Yeah, because stuff is like astronomical. I mean, but it's always so hard to say. It's like, well, but it's like they're helping your health and your life, and you should you should be thankful because.
Yeah, but that's how it works.
But that's the thing. It's like, but yeah, okay, you should be thankful for something that probably took a couple of minutes, costing thousands of dollars.
Well, this is the point.
I mean,
you are
and something that like also you may have not even needed.
Yeah, but they don't ask you. They
just,
don't. Yeah. But this is Illich's point. Like, if you question it, you're a deviant.
Yeah.
And this is how it works. It's not Big Brother. Your neighbor calls you a deviant, not the hospitals. This is the key. Like, it's not Big Brother. It's not like the hospitals are like calling you a deviant for saying this. Literally, your community, family, and friends is calling you this. This is how it works. It becomes a zeitgeist of control, not simply a Big Brother.
And also, like, that control is genuinely like
loving,
in a way, a loving parent.
Yes.
And so it's like, and that's why it's like you probably even go through your own type of crazy. Am I crazy, right?
Yes.
Because like, well, but this is a loving parent. This system has always been a loving parent.
Yeah.
And I think like, well, there are certain times in history when something happens when suddenly you're like, wait a second.
Yes.
Maybe they don't have my best interest.
Yes.
And maybe they're not the loving parent that I. Not to judge and to not like. There's actually no way. I think there has to be a way in which you have a type of grace, because a lot of times the system just kind of it's not out to get you. It genuinely thinks
it has
it's
a
doing
game
its
theory.
best.
It has a game theory dynamic.
Yeah, and so you don't see it as like in a hateful way. You just sort of recognize that it's not allowing itself or the people underneath it or in that system to be conscious of certain things.
No.
And that's not, but anyways, it's kind of like, oh, wait a second. Maybe it doesn't have my best interest in mind, not because it doesn't have my best interest in mind, but more so because it doesn't even want to allow itself to be conscious of certain things, It
becomes its own operation.
Yeah.
Like if a tractor rolls over your car, does the tractor have your worst interest in mind? No, it just becomes its own self-operating system. It's all game theory dynamics. And this is what Illich, this is when technology replaces humanity. When it takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
Like the system, and this is Kafka. This is why Kafka is a better analysis.
Yeah.
Because in Kafka, the bureaucracy is like, sorry, just going to have to wait, see the next person, or the movie Brazil. Like, no one's responsible. This is why bureaucracy is so dangerous. Yeah. Because in bureaucracy, no one's responsible. It just
wouldn't one say, though, like, but you should also be thankful for bureaucracy, because if without it, like, good luck, try to see if anything would, you know what I'm saying? Like, for something to function, there is a level of bureaucracy that is necessary.
Yes, but that's used to defend completely irrational levels of bureaucracy.
Yeah, exactly.
And it would also depend on what you mean.
It's different between like a small business. It has its own bureaucracy, but it's not like it's not requiring, like you're saying, the sort of infrastructure of bureaucracy that that can be so detrimental.
That clearly exists to create price dynamics that are advantageous to the bureaucracy. Like if you can create 5 positions and you have to pay all 5 positions through the insurance structure, the bureaucracy in the health industry, there is literally, since the insurance is going to pay for it, the hospitals have incentive to create as many hands as possible you must go through so that everyone gets a payment. And so it becomes a race to the top in the pricing system. So like bureaucracies become their own thing. Like they get their own kind of life.
Its own organism.
Yeah, it's like an organism in a way, like an organ without bodies or something, right? You know, bodies without organs or something. Some body without organs. So so there you go, Javier, with your penguin. But anyway, classic reference. But but the problem is, because an ethic emerges that makes you unable to question it, when the system becomes pathological, you can't stop it.
That's what I was going to say. I was like, it's really important what you just said, because I was thinking about it as like, it really speaks to questioning and the power of questioning.
Yes.
But see, like I was saying at the beginning of the talk, I think that it's very difficult for people not to take questioning as an interrogation, as I've done something wrong, or I'm being blamed here, or da 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 da. It's like, I think there's a genuine curiosity that needs to be brought to, that has to be highlighted. Not so much. It needs to be highlighted as essential, because if you don't have the genuine curiosity and the ability to question it, like if somebody's questioning something in a genuine, curious way, not a judgmental way, then that means they care. You know what I mean? I don't think it's just, we can't take questioning as like an assault.
But it's very difficult if that's how school, like when the teacher asks you a question, wasn't it an attack? You get it wrong, now you look stupid. Like literally the context of school creates a subconscious.
Questions always kind of like the way we're brought up, basically with how schooling works generally, is there's a lot of kind of shame that's tucked into questioning.
Yes.
It's a lot of potential shame, because if you get it wrong, you should feel bad. You did something wrong.
Yes.
It's very difficult to have a place of questions where it's more Socratic, right? Where it's sort of like, you suddenly, it's not so much shame, but you're suddenly like, wow, there's a lot that I don't know. There's no shame attached to this, but it's more the sense of like, wow, I have a provocation to understand the depth of my ignorance, but also my ability to learn so much more. You know what I'm saying? Like questioning is just so essential, and yet we've damaged it so much with the system, which then makes you not allowed to question it. You're only ever allowed to get, and this is the thing I brought up with Jochen one time in Javier's Buber sessions a while ago, where Jochen did a great presentation, and I remember bringing up this point of like, we always get the questions, right?
Yes.
Here's the questions you can ask, and here's the questions you need to answer. But in terms of what we need to ask, no. There's very little place to cultivate what questions are you could ask. Because if you ask questions that aren't in the system or not in the script, there's very little tolerance of that.
Well, because it's a counterfeit question. They're not real questions. They're not really questions. They're more like problems.
What's they're from school?
Yeah, you're taught that a question is a problem you need an answer to. Like the problem is you need to answer 3 of these on the test right to get to pass. Questions are actually always presented in a schema of a problem, as in, oh crap, this is going to be graded. I faced a problem. I need to get an A, and if I don't get an A, I won't get a job.
Yeah.
So the problem is questions are always directed in the schema of a problem, so they're not actually questions.
Right.
Real questions based on Socrates is more like a Heideggerian creation of a clearing so that being can come forth. Like questions is, how do we remove what we think is the case so that the world can actually be disclosed as it actually is.
Right.
There's a piece in Thoughts on question as well, and the thing is, question is the only way to make a separation between you and your world. Like a question goes, wait a minute, is that so? Mm-hmm. Without question, there's no possibility of a break between actuality and appearance. And here's the thing. That means the system wins, because the only reality is the system. So if you can't create a break between appearance and actuality, then whatever the system presents you with is actuality, not merely an appearance, and so you do it. So question is the only way to create a break between you and the world you're in.
Yeah.
And if you can't create that break, you're captured. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to be controlled and ruined. Maybe the system, is good, right?
Yeah.
But it does mean you have no other strategy. Then whatever the system is, that's your strategy for life. And hopefully it works out. But question creates the possibility of if the system goes awry, which at a certain scale, I follow Leopold and the breakdown of nature. At a certain scale, all systems go awry. And if the system is large, it probably has gone awry. And so if you can't question, you can't separate yourself from that thing that has gone awry. So you're done. You're just going to be pulled under with it. And so question's the only way to separate yourself from the world. And you must have that ability to separate if you're going to have hope, if the system is becoming self-effacing.
Yeah. No, that was good. I think too, questions, being able to question things, it's like it's a suspension of judgment, but too often questions are thought of as judgments.
Correct.
And people do use questions sometimes like judgments. It's kind of like those false questions, that people ask.
Yeah, they're more like attacks. Yes.
But when you're genuinely, and I think that's where it's like you kind of have to see the heart behind it in a way too, like. And sort of assume the best. Like when a question is presented, not just assume that it's like underhanded attack or something. It's like it could just be the person trying to get curious, trying to think about what's happening, what's going on, what are the results, what's the fruits of something. And I think so anyways, I think basically questions are a suspension of judgment, which is that causes that separation, like you're saying, like kind of stepping back from the system and looking at it, right, and saying how is this, what's happening here, what's going on, or what are the sort of like the unintended consequences or the unintended benefits even. I mean, it's not necessarily bad. It's just being able to kind of step back and look at it and kind of ask some questions, I do think it's weird though. It's hard to have that space. It's necessary though. It's so necessary because it's almost like, it kind of reminds me a little bit of psychoanalysis in the sense of like kind of an unjudgmental space to speak and not have it be a judgment. It's just a place to speak. It's a space to ask questions, to question, and not have it be like, so what are you saying about me? Or what are you saying about me as in the system, right? It's like, well, it's also just sort of revealing things. A lot of times the things that are just this like place to speak or ask questions is the space to actually have things be indicated. It's not, not implicated, but indicated,
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, it is probably in the same way that there could be an advantage to the system to only have it be good or bad, and remove the category of tragedy. If questions are always bad, then you would never question the system, without doing something bad or saying that it's bad. And when people are like, what do you mean it's bad? I can get food at the supermarket. Like, since the system gives you things, then it's likely the majority of people will mostly see it as good. And so if you question it, then they're going to see you as bad, and the system is invincible. And usually the issue is systems, like if the majority of it wasn't good, it would have been overthrown a long time ago. Right. It has to be a sustainable system of control. 95% of it has to be good, of course, or something like that. The problem is the 5% that's bad can ruin your life. And without questions, you're not going to be able to spot that 5%.
Well, maybe it'd be like, what do you mean by ruin your life, and what do you mean by control? Because for a lot of times, a system that, like you said, 95% of it's working, or 95% of the time it's working, then, again, there's no reason to ever question it because it's been fine.
Yeah, well, you're probably not going to be able to identify that it's the source of your nihilism or your meaning crisis or your inability to get married or the fact that you've moved far away from your family and you have no connections. Right. The fact that you're not financially stable because you're running a career ladder in an expensive, community that just unemployed you with, fired you with AI or different things. Like people's lives are ruined. By ruined, made very difficult. Let's say that. Mm-hmm. Many people's lives are made very difficult. But since the system treated them well for 28 years of their life, or maybe 48 years of their life, once it drops them like a hot potato, or once they, run into the limits of what that system can provide, it probably will not occur to them to blame the system, because, it paid them, it gave them a path, it gave them, an opportunity. And so they're probably going to do what? Blame themselves, think there's something wrong with them, or they're going to become nihilistic and say there's something wrong with the universe, and change becomes impossible. This is the issue. The reason why, these questions, there's no possibility of change without questions, because questions separate you from what is to change what is, or to change yourself in relation to what is. So basically, if you can't question, then you have no ability to pivot your life strategy. Again, by all means, do the career if that's what you want to do and you're motivated to do it. But when everything eventually hits a limit, there's, you're going to hit some sort of limitation. Well, if you have the skill of questions, then you could pivot and, change your strategy and change how you live. But if you can't do that and you're disabled, then you're just going to repeat what you did.
Right.
Go back to what you did, or try harder at what you did, and things will not improve. Things will not get better. And that's what we mean when I say ruin your life. Usually what happens is people's lives end up in some sort of repetitive cycle they can't break out of.
Well, yeah, and that's a great way to talk about it, because I think too, we can talk about it in terms of institutional systems, but ultimately all of those are kind of a system of thinking, right?
Yes.
It's a way of thinking, and it's enclosed in that sense, and it really doesn't invite the questions like we've talked about. And this is where, I think this can happen. This happens all the time. This happens a lot in relationships and things like that, because it's almost like there's no ability to sort of try to question if there are certain things that lead to certain results or whatever. And it gets very difficult, I think, in relationships, because it's very intimate and personal, and it's hard for people to not feel like they're failing or something like this, and so it's even more difficult, I want to say, to kind of have the questioning without it feeling difficult or, again, hard or attacked, an attack, when genuinely, I think questions are really trying to, the fact that somebody even wants to talk about it, it's not because they are trying to be, well, it depends. Yes, obviously people can be judgmental, but I think when somebody's being genuinely attempting to try, that's a form of trying to connect and trying to work through things. It's not trying to say I've got all the answers. It's trying to say, hey, I don't know, but this,
right.
And so I think that's it's just that it's so common. And then also, like you're saying, the thing is that if you don't understand that the system has its limits, then you will never be able to see that there could be really amazing hope for change, like you're saying.
Right.
And you can, instead of it just becoming oh, it's all their fault, or it's all my fault, or it's, just getting very nihilistic, you get into a sort of more of a sense of, well, what is the kind of way that we've all kind of been unconsciously trained to think, and maybe what might be good about that and bad about that, and what could maybe be changed so that we can become more aware and do things in a way that, in a different manner, because everything's going to ultimately become some sort of some kind of system in a way. We're not talking about being chaotic here, or unsystematic in a chaotic sense, but it's to say that it has to be kind of your own ability to change and adapt and grow and do things differently sometimes, so that you don't just get stuck, and you don't just get kind of stuck in ruts of these sort of repetitious patterns that then people get very kind of just emotionally, down by, so yeah.
Now at this point, I want to start talking about how Nietzsche again is quite useful here, because his idea was empowerment as sort of a response to meaning and nihilism, and that speaks to ablement with Illich and stuff like that. But we're going to save that for the course. And I think what you just said there is exactly right, Michelle, and I think kind of points to what we hope to do in the course.
Do we touch on every class? We did motivation, self-forgetfulness.
Ultimately that last thing with Nietzsche would be on the auto-mastery kind of thing.
Okay.
Then enjoying your unknowns, which...
Yeah. And that enjoying your unknowns also speaks to your unconscious,
Absolutely. And, if in all of that, Well, and again, it's no one intends to live a life without meaning. So why do they? Nobody intends to live without friends. So why do friendship and things slip away? It's because, we don't know what we don't know. And we lose our humanity when we know everything. And that paradox, which is central, I think, to really understanding how to be a human in the world today, is what we hope to bring out in different ways throughout the course.
Yeah.
So we hope
you
join
us.
Starting November 4th. But we certainly
thank you.
Hope you join us, and we're grateful to Parallax for the opportunity.
Yes, very much so.
And so sign up today. You can do it at Parallax, the website, and their YouTube channel.
If you go to the Parallax website, you click on Academy, and that's where you'll find the courses listed.
You will. And so thank you so much for your time.
Yes, thank you.